Friday nights in suburban Ohio were predictable. David Miller liked them that way. He'd get home from the machine shop around 6, shower off the grease and steel dust, grill something simple on the back porch, and maybe crack open a cold beer while his wife Rachel flipped through streaming channels she never committed to watching. 20 years of marriage built its own rhythm, a steady beat of comfort and familiarity. That night, though, the beat stumbled. Rachel was buzzing around the house, dressed sharper than usual. Black dress, new earrings, perfume that carried sharper notes than the one David had given her last Christmas. She said she was meeting her college friends at a wine bar across town, laughing in that distracted way she did when her mind was already somewhere else. David caught her by the door, kissed her cheek out of habit, and told her to drive safe. She smiled, but her eyes didn't quite land on him. Then the door clicked shut, and her absence seemed to echo louder than her presence ever had. David stayed home, cooked himself a steak, and poured a glass of whiskey. He put on a Clint Eastwood movie Rachel never cared for and let the silence of the house wrap around him. For a while, it was almost relaxing. No interruptions, no second-guessing what to watch, no background chatter. But as the hours dragged past midnight, unease started to creep in. He checked the clock too often. The whiskey glass sat untouched on the end table. When headlights finally swept across the living room curtains, David stood at the window. Rachel stumbled out of the passenger seat of a car he didn't recognize, barefoot, shoes dangling from her hand. Her dress was ripped at the hem, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint. She smelled of smoke, sweat, and most jarringly, a man's cologne. Not her own perfume, not anything she'd ever worn before. Something stronger, musky, unmistakably male. "Rough night?" David asked evenly as he opened the door for her. Rachel laughed it off too quickly. "Just too much wine. You know how it gets." He offered his arm, steadied her up the stairs, but inside his chest, something tightened. A small coil of suspicion wound itself and refused to loosen. He laid her in bed, pulled the covers up, and listened as she slipped into heavy, uneven sleep. But David didn't sleep. He sat in the living room chair, staring at the muted TV glow until dawn pressed against the windows. His mind replayed every detail. The torn dress, the smeared makeup, the shoes in her hand, the scent clinging to her skin that didn't belong to her. Details that wouldn't matter to anyone else, but to him, they built a case too strong to ignore. He thought about their years together, the house they'd built, the arguments they'd survived, the nights they'd collapsed side by side after long days of work. And yet, for the first time, he felt something fracture beneath it all, like the first hairline crack in a foundation that once seemed solid. Rachel mumbled in her sleep upstairs, shifting under the covers. David sat rigid, jaw locked, eyes burning from sleeplessness, as if keeping watch over a battlefield he hadn't chosen. He wasn't the kind of man to jump to conclusions, but he trusted his gut more than he trusted excuses. And his gut was already whispering the truth he didn't want to hear. Something had broken tonight, and no matter what Rachel said in the morning, it would never fit back together the same way. By sunrise, David was still awake, staring at the first light spilling across the floor. He didn't reach for coffee. He didn't reach for his wife. He just sat there, silently marking the moment, knowing this was the night everything shifted. The week after that Friday night felt like living in a house where the walls had started to creak, but nobody wanted to admit the foundation was sinking. Rachel moved through her days with a forced brightness that grated on David's nerves more than silence ever could. She laughed too loudly at the morning news. She filled the dishwasher wrong on purpose, as if daring him to correct her like he used to. Every move carried a kind of performance, like she was acting out the part of faithful wife for an audience she no longer respected. On Monday morning, David noticed her necklace lying on the kitchen counter. Not just any necklace. It was the silver chain he had bought her for their 15th anniversary. The clasp was broken clean through. When he asked about it, she shrugged and said she must have snagged it on a sweater. Her voice was too casual, her eyes too quick to look away. He thought about the torn dress from Friday night, and the explanation clanged hollow in his chest. By Wednesday, it was her dress again, this time hastily stitched at the seam with thread that didn't match. David found it draped across the back of a chair, as if she'd forgotten to hide it. When he brought it up, Rachel's answer came fast, rehearsed, like a line she'd already practiced in front of a mirror. "Oh, that old thing. I just caught it on a door handle. No big deal." She followed it with a laugh, too airy, too false. But the biggest tell wasn't in the clothes. It was on the phone. Rachel had never been one to guard her phone before. She used to leave it charging on the nightstand or in the kitchen while she cooked. Now it was always face down, always on silent. When it buzzed, she slid it into her purse with a speed that set David's teeth on edge. One evening at dinner, he asked casually, "Is everything okay with work? You've been glued to that phone lately." Her fork clinked against the plate. "Just busy. You know how it is." But David did know how it was, and it wasn't like this. Rachel wasn't a surgeon or an executive. She worked part-time at a boutique. Nothing in her life required this kind of secrecy. She shifted the conversation fast, mocking one of her coworkers whose husband was so paranoid he checks her texts. Rachel laughed, tossing her hair like she was above it all, then leveled a look at David. "Can you imagine living like that? What kind of man doesn't trust his wife?" The words landed heavy, not because David felt accused, but because he recognized the tactic. She wasn't just mocking that husband. She was planting a warning, daring David not to question her. He didn't rise to it. He just cut his steak slowly, chewed, and kept his silence. Let her think he was blind. Let her believe her performance was holding. Because beneath his calm, David's anger simmered. Not the wild kind that burned hot and faded, but the slow, steady kind that sharpened over time. At night, lying beside her in bed, he felt the distance stretch wider than the mattress between them. Rachel turned her back, phone under her pillow, breathing too evenly to be genuine sleep. David stared at the ceiling, fists resting on his chest, every instinct telling him he was being played for a fool. He thought about the years they had spent together. The mortgages paid, the vacations scrapped so they could replace a leaky roof, the countless overtime shifts he had pulled so she wouldn't have to. And here she was, laughing about paranoid husbands, as if loyalty were a punchline. By Friday, David knew the truth was circling closer. The necklace, the torn dress, the face-down phone, lies stacked on lies, thin as tissue paper. He didn't have the full picture yet, but he had enough to know one thing with certainty. Rachel was daring him to see her, and he did. He saw her clearer than she realized. Thursday afternoon, David finished his job early and drove home before sunset. He wasn't planning on catching Rachel in anything, at least not consciously. But some part of him wanted to see the house in motion when she didn't expect him. He parked in the driveway, shut the truck door without slamming it, and stepped inside as quietly as a man his size could. The house smelled faintly of her perfume and coffee grounds, but layered over it was something else. Tension, sharp as the smell of ozone before a storm. He heard her voice before he saw her. Low, intimate, playful in a way she hadn't sounded with him in years. David froze in the hallway, one hand braced against the wall. "Adam," she whispered into the phone, voice soft, dripping with warmth. "Stop, you're terrible." "No, he's clueless. He never notices. Last night was perfect. God, you don't know what you do to me." The words sliced through David like a clean blade. No need for torn dresses or broken necklaces this time. Her voice alone carried the proof. She wasn't rehearsing excuses with him now. She was stripped down, unguarded, the Rachel he hadn't seen in years, and she was giving that self to someone else. To Adam. David stood there for what felt like hours but couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. He didn't breathe. He didn't move. He listened as his wife, the woman he'd shared 2 decades with, mocked him, told another man he was blind, and described their last night together with a laugh that used to belong to him. When she finally hung up, David backed away on instinct. His boots were heavy on the floor, but she didn't hear. He stepped outside, shut the door, and sat in his truck. His chest felt tight, his throat dry, but no tears came. Just that slow, grinding anger building in his gut like a furnace stoking itself. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles bleached white. For a moment he thought about storming back in, ripping the phone out of her hand, demanding she look him in the eye while she said Adam's name again. But that wasn't his way. Not now. Rage without control was a fool's move, and David wasn't about to hand her the satisfaction of seeing him break. Instead, he started the truck and drove. Not anywhere in particular. Just miles of asphalt under the tires while his mind tried to sort the jagged edges of what he'd heard. The anger wanted to explode, to consume, but he forced it down, fed it into something colder, sharper. Controlled anger wasn't weakness. It was clear. He thought about every overtime shift he had worked so she could have the house she wanted, the trips she planned, the little luxuries she never thanked him for. He thought about the loyalty he had given freely, not as some grand gesture, but as a man's word kept day after day, year after year. And now, in exchange, she whispered another man's name in their home. When he finally pulled back into the driveway, hours later, the house was quiet. Rachel was upstairs, the glow of her phone visible under the bedroom door. David didn't go in. He stayed downstairs, sitting in the dark, the blue light of the muted TV flickering against his face. There, in that silence, he let the truth settle fully. This wasn't suspicious anymore. This wasn't a cracked necklace or a hidden phone. This was confirmation, carved clean and undeniable. Rachel had a lover, and his name was Adam. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and breathed steady through his nose. He didn't feel broken. He felt awake. Betrayal was no longer a question, and once a man had the truth, there was no going back. Upstairs, Rachel laughed softly at something glowing on her screen. David sat below, staring at nothing, his jaw hard, his resolve forming. She thought she was 2 steps ahead. She thought he'd never notice, but he had. And the moment her voice had carried Adam's name into the dark, she had set something in motion she couldn't stop. David wasn't going to confront her tonight, or tomorrow. He was going to watch, to listen, to let her lies pile high enough that when he finally pushed back, the whole thing would come down on her head. He leaned back, eyes half closed, the anger steady in him now. Not wild, not reckless, controlled, ready, because now he had a name, and that meant the hunt had started. When Rachel announced on Friday that she was headed to a work happy hour, David didn't flinch. He didn't roll his eyes, and didn't question why a boutique clerk suddenly had more evening events than a senator. He just nodded, leaned back in his chair and said, "Have fun." His calm seemed to satisfy her. She kissed his cheek without looking him in the eye and left in a hurry, heels clicking on the driveway. But David had already decided. Tonight, there would be no guessing. Tonight, he'd take the truth in his own hands. He waited 10 minutes, then grabbed his jacket and keys. His old F-150 started with a growl that matched the rhythm in his chest. He kept his distance as he followed her across town, headlights dim, every turn taken a few car lengths behind. She didn't notice. People rarely do when they think no one cares enough to watch. Rachel pulled into a dimly lit bar near the interstate, the kind of place where neon signs hummed over cracked pavement and smokers clustered by the door. She stepped out of the car, smoothing her dress, checking her phone. That's when he saw him. Adam Carter. You didn't need introductions to spot him. Tall, well-groomed, the kind of man who carried himself like he was the prize in every room. Rachel walked straight into his arms. They kissed openly, not the quick peck of people sneaking around, but the kind of kiss that said they didn't give a damn who saw. David's hands trembled on the steering wheel. For months, he'd felt like he was losing his grip on reality. But here it was, proof standing under a buzzing Budweiser sign, proof with Rachel's lipstick smearing onto Adam's grin. He forced his hands steady, pulled out his phone and snapped the photo. Then another. Then one more, framing them as they laughed, leaned close, and disappeared inside the bar together. Each picture was a nail in the coffin of her lies. Each click of the shutter calmed him. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't insecurity. This was betrayal captured in pixels he could hold up to the light. David stayed in the truck for nearly an hour, staring at the door where they'd gone inside. He didn't follow them in. He didn't need to see more. What mattered was clarity. And for the first time in months, he felt it. The weight pressing on his chest loosened. Not because the pain had lessened, it hadn't. It burned. But because the guessing was over. Lies rot a man from the inside out, but truth, even when it's brutal, gives you something to stand on. When Rachel finally came out, hair mussed, Adam's hand sliding off her lower back as they parted ways, David didn't move. He didn't honk, didn't drive off to be noticed. He just watched. She walked to her car, adjusted her dress, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and drove home like nothing had happened. David followed at a distance again, quiet, measured. He parked 2 blocks away, giving himself a few minutes before pulling into his own driveway. By the time he walked into the house, Rachel was already upstairs, pretending to fold laundry, pretending the world was intact. He didn't confront her that night. Not yet. Instead, he plugged his phone into the charger and scrolled through the photos, one by one, in the dim light of his workshop. The images didn't hurt him the way he expected. They hardened him. They gave shape to the anger that had been gnawing at him in the dark. Tomorrow or the next day he will decide what to do. But for now he had proof. Not whispers in the night. Not perfume that wasn't hers. Not excuses delivered with forced laughter. He had pictures. And pictures, unlike words, don't lie. Sitting there with the phone in his hand, David felt something unfamiliar. Control. For months, Rachel had been 2 steps ahead, dancing in shadows, weaving lies. Tonight, he'd stepped into those shadows and lit a match. And when she least expected it, he would burn her house of cards to the ground. Rachel slipped through the door just past midnight, humming off-key, trying to look casual. David was waiting in the living room, phone in hand, TV dark. She froze when she saw him, eyes flicking from his face to the glowing screen he held. "Rough night?" he asked, voice flat, calm enough to cut glass. She gave him the same rehearsed smile she'd been practicing for weeks. "Just work drinks. You didn't need to wait up." David tilted the phone so the screen faced her. There it was, her and Adam in the parking lot, locked together, laughing under neon. Proof staring her down. Rachel's breath caught. "That's not." "Don't," David cut in. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight in it was heavier than a shout. "You're not talking your way out of this one." Her excuses faltered on her lips. She opened her mouth, shut it, tried again, but nothing came. For the first time, her eyes held fear instead of arrogance. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," David said. "Papers are in motion. This house is mine." "You're not." Rachel shook her head, as if denial could roll back the clock. "David, please. It was a mistake. We can work through this." "No," he said, sharp as a hammer strike. "You made your choice. Now live with it." The silence stretched, thick enough to choke on. Rachel's shoulders slumped. She turned without another word and walked upstairs. Within minutes, the sound of zippers carried through the house. Suitcases dragged from closets, drawers opening, clothes stuffed without care. David sat in his chair, arms crossed, staring at the darkened TV screen. He didn't move. He didn't help. He didn't stop her. He just waited, jaw set, listening to the sound of her packing echo like nails being driven into the coffin of their marriage. At 1:30, Rachel appeared at the top of the stairs, pale, eyes rimmed red, dragging 2 suitcases that looked heavier than she did. She paused as if expecting him to say something, to beg, to rage, to ask why. But David only stood, walked to the door, and opened it wide. Rachel's chin trembled. She rolled the bags past him and stepped into the night without looking back. When the latch clicked shut behind her, David slid the deadbolt into place. Not to keep her out, but to close the chapter. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. It wasn't suspicion pressing on his chest. It wasn't lies whispering through the walls. It was finality, and for the first time in months, David felt steady. The morning after Rachel walked out, the house felt hollow but clean, like a wound freshly cauterized. No perfume hanging in the air, no phone buzzing face down, No lies pretending to be laughter. Just silence, the kind a man can trust. David sat at the kitchen table, black coffee cooling in his hand, phone resting beside it. He scrolled through the photos again, the images crisp in the daylight. Rachel and Adam. Adam and Rachel. A betrayal solid enough to touch. He wasn't a man to gloat, but he wasn't about to let the truth rot inside him either. Rachel had left with her lies intact, still able to spin her story to whoever would listen. But Adam Carter still had a wife, a woman named Emily, whom David had met once in passing at a neighborhood barbecue. She'd been quiet, reserved, the type who made polite conversation and kept her eyes on her kids. She deserved to know. David typed the message slowly, each word deliberate. Emily, I think you need to see this. I'm not sending it to hurt you, but because you deserve the truth. These were taken last night. He attached the photos and hit send. His thumb lingered on the screen a moment. Then he set the phone face up on the table and walked away. By noon, Emily responded. Thank you. I knew something was wrong. You've just given me what I needed. No drama. No drawn-out conversation. Just gratitude edged with heartbreak. 2 days later, the fallout began. Word traveled fast in a town where reputations stuck like mud. Emily filed for separation the same week. Adam's name, once solid at his firm, turned sour in the office halls. Whispers followed him. About the affair. About how his wife had blindsided him with paperwork after a stranger's message arrived. Rachel, meanwhile, called David, then texted, then called again. At first, she was angry, furious he'd dragged other people into their personal business. She accused him of revenge, of cruelty. David didn't answer. Her next messages softened. Apologies, promises to explain, memories dredged up from better years. Remember our trip to Nashville? Remember how we said nothing could break us? He read them once, then muted the thread. By the weekend, her tone shifted again, begging, please, David, I made a mistake. Just one mistake. Don't throw away 20 years. But David didn't see it as throwing anything away. He saw it as finally putting down something that had been rotting in his hands for months. He didn't respond. He owed her nothing. At the machine shop, his coworkers noticed the change. You're quiet, Miller, one of them said, handing him a wrench. Not quiet, David replied. Just done wasting words. And that was the truth of it. He wasn't broken. He wasn't lost. He was finished carrying someone else's lies on his back. The photos had burned the bridge clean, and now all that remained was the solid ground of his own dignity. That night, he sat on the back porch, beer in hand, the summer air heavy with the sound of cicadas. The house was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. Felt honest. Every creak of the wood, every hum of the night, belonged to him again. Rachel's affair had detonated both households, his and Adam's. But David didn't celebrate. There was no victory in watching lives collapse. Only balance. She had made her choices, and now the consequences had finally spread where they belonged. For once, the weight wasn't his alone to carry. He took a slow drink, leaned back in the chair, and let the night wrap around him. Peace wasn't here yet, not fully, but it was on the horizon, steady as the dawn. The texts from Rachel kept coming long after she dragged her suitcases into the night. At first, they came in bursts, long paragraphs that swung from sorrow to rage, apology to accusation. You never fought for me. I can't believe you'd give up this easily. Please, David, I'm begging you, don't let 20 years vanish like this. David never answered. He read them once, deleted some, and muted others. Each vibration of the phone grew weaker in his mind, like echoes from a tunnel he'd already walked out of. The silence he offered wasn't a weakness. It was the cleanest line he could draw. With Rachel gone, the house took on a new rhythm. No more tense dinners, no more laughter that felt like performance, no more perfume that smelled of someone else's night. At first, the emptiness was heavy. He'd find himself setting 2 plates out of habit, or catching his hand reaching for a body that wasn't there when he woke at dawn. But slowly, the absence became space. Space to breathe, space to think. space to remember who the hell he was before betrayal turned him into a watchman of lies. He signed up for guitar lessons at the local community center, something he'd put off for years because Rachel mocked the idea. Middle-aged men with guitars, she'd sneered once. That's just sad. Now, the strings felt like rebellion under his fingers, calluses forming where doubt used to sit. He called up old friends, men he hadn't fished with in a decade, and found their laughter came easy. They didn't ask about Rachel, and he didn't offer. Some things didn't need retelling. On Sundays, he drove out of town with no destination in mind, just miles of road unspooling beneath the tires. Sometimes he'd stop at diners he'd never tried, sometimes at quiet parks where he'd sit with a thermos of coffee and watch strangers live their lives. Each trip reminded him he wasn't bound to her anymore. It was on one of those trips, a stretch of the California coast he hadn't seen in years, that he met Kate Johnson. She was leaning against the railing of a boardwalk cafe, book in hand, her hair pulled back against the wind. Their conversation started over something simple, coffee orders, the weather, the view, and stretched into hours. Kate wasn't looking for romance, and neither was he. She was a divorced single mom with stories carved deep into her face, the kind you could only earn through survival. They talked about scars, not the kind you can see, but the ones you carry in silence. She told him about loyalty, about what it cost when given to the wrong person. He told her about work, about raising a life on stubborn hands, about what betrayal teaches you if you let it. When they parted, there were no promises, no exchanged phone numbers, just a look that said, "I see you. You're still standing. So am I." Driving back that night, David realized something. He didn't need Rachel's texts to validate his worth. He didn't need apologies that came too late or nostalgia wrapped in manipulation. He had his own strength, his own future. For the first time since the perfume that wasn't hers had drifted through the door, David felt whole. Not because someone else filled the gap, but because he finally claimed the space as his own. It was late autumn when David got the message. A short text, nothing flowery. "Can we meet? I owe you the truth." Signed, Adam. For a moment, David almost ignored it. He had no use for the man, no appetite for rehashing the past. But curiosity has a way of tugging even the strongest men toward unfinished business. So he agreed. They met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place with chipped mugs and scratched tables, where the only music was the clink of spoons against ceramic. Adam arrived looking worn down, hair unkempt, eyes sunken. The swagger David remembered from the bar parking lot was gone. "I didn't call you here to fight," Adam began, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he barely touched. I need you to know something." David leaned back, arms crossed, silent. Adam exhaled, words tumbling like stones. "Rachel kept chasing me even after the divorce. Said you'd never take her back, that she had nowhere else to go. But I couldn't do it anymore. She was relentless. And then I found out." He paused, swallowed. "She was seeing someone else the whole time. A guy named Brian. She lied to me too. The name didn't sting. It didn't shock me. It didn't even register as fresh pain. It was confirmation of what David already knew deep down. That Rachel's betrayal wasn't a one-time slip, but a pattern. A sickness that never would have stopped with Adam. Or Brian. Or whoever else came next." Adam looked up, guilt painted on his face. "I thought she loved me. I thought she was leaving you for me. But she wasn't leaving anyone for anyone. She just never belonged to anyone. Not you. Not me." David's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. What was there to say? The man sitting across from him wasn't a rival anymore. He was another casualty. Another fool who thought Rachel's promises meant something. After a long silence, David finally said, "You're telling me this why?" "Because I'm done lying to myself," Adam admitted. "And because you deserved better. We both did." David finished his coffee in one slow swallow, set the mug down with finality, and stood. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "She showed us both who she was. That's all that matters." Adam nodded, eyes dropping to the table. David left him there, a broken man trying to piece together the ruins. Outside, The air was sharp with the bite of approaching winter. David walked slowly to his truck, the words replaying in his head but not rattling him. The truth wasn't a bomb anymore, it was just confirmation. Rachel hadn't been lost to Adam or Brian or anyone else. She'd been lost to herself long before David ever suspected. That night, back home, David pulled out his phone one last time. He scrolled to Rachel's name. Still there, still untouched since the night she walked out. His thumb hovered for a moment, then he hit delete. No ceremony, no hesitation, just gone. And with that, the last tether snapped. The morning after meeting Adam, David drove into town, needing nothing more than a hot coffee and the hum of life around him. On the corner near the square, a used book vendor had set up shop, cardboard boxes stacked with paperbacks under a handwritten sign. Most of the words meant nothing to him: romance, fantasy, self-help. But one phrase caught his eye, painted in bold on the vendor's board: "True love never deceives." It reveals. He didn't buy the book. He didn't even ask the price. He just carried the phrase with him as he walked back to his truck. Stuck in his chest not as sentiment, but as truth. Real love doesn't hide behind perfume that isn't yours, or whispered names in the dark. Real love shows itself, plain and simple, without excuse or disguise. In the weeks that followed, David found himself leaning into that truth. He filled his time with work at the shop, with the guitar calluses building on his fingertips, with long phone calls to old friends. He learned to cook meals for one without feeling the sting of absence. Sundays weren't empty anymore, they were his. Rachel's silence eventually matched his own. The messages stopped. The calls died out. Her shadow faded, replaced by the solid weight of his own independence. On a crisp Saturday, David drove back to the California coast. He walked the same boardwalk where he'd met Kate Johnson, hoping by chance she might be there again. She wasn't, but he didn't feel disappointed. What mattered wasn't whether someone else filled the space Rachel left. What mattered was that the space was his to begin with, and he was finally living inside it fully. David leaned against the railing, waves pounding the rocks below, and breathed deep. He wasn't waiting for Rachel to regret her choices. He wasn't waiting for Adam or Brian or whoever came next to fall apart. He wasn't waiting for apologies that would never carry weight. He was done waiting. For the first time in years, his life wasn't defined by what someone else hid or betrayed. It was defined by his choices. His anger tempered into clarity, his silence sharpened into strength, his solitude reshaped into peace. David Miller didn't get the storybook ending of reunion, redemption, or rekindled vows. What he got was better. Freedom, dignity, and the unshakable knowledge that he had walked through fire without bowing his head. And that was enough.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.